All right, so we're teeing off today on this deep dive, and I am pumped. We're going to unlock the secrets of something every golfer craves power. And, it might surprise you, but it all starts with a seemingly small move, the pelvis turn.
It really is kind of the unsung hero of the swing.
Right. It's like often overlooked, but we're going to get into why it impacts your whole swing.
Oh, absolutely. It's the foundation.
Okay, so we've got two awesome sources lined up. One breaks down like the mechanics of pelvis turn.
All the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one, this is cool. It gives us the inside scoop from a PGA pro. Plus, we've got some actual data from the tour, both men and women, to compare.
Should be some interesting insights there.
For sure. So get ready for some serious aha moments, folks, because we're going to figure out how to hit the ball farther, more consistently, and all while keeping your back happy. Did you know that women golfers, on average, rotate their pelvises even more than men?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. We'll definitely dig into that.
We will. All right, so let's just start with the basics. What exactly is pelvis turn and why is it so crucial in the golf swing?
Think of your pelvis like as a steering wheel for your whole swing. Pelvis turn is all about rotating that steering wheel around an axis that runs straight through your hips. And that rotation is what lets you transfer all that energy from your legs and core all the way up to your arms and ultimately the club. So the smoother and more efficient that transfer is, the more power you're going to generate.
So it's not just about raw power, though, right?
Not at all. A really consistent pelvis turn also helps you hit the ball with the same club face angle and swing path time after time. So your shots become way more predictable, more accurate.
Gotcha. So more power, better accuracy, anything else?
Oh yeah, big one. A back saver. When your pelvis is moving correctly, it takes a lot of pressure off your lower back, which is, huge for anyone who's ever felt that dreaded golfer's ache.
Sign me up for all of that. So our first source here, it gets really deep into the mechanics, talking about something called the skull spring concept.
Yes. Classic.
Sounds intense, but basically it means your body's storing and releasing energy like a spring, right?
Yeah, that's the main idea. And the pelvis turn is really like the key to winding up that spring for max power. Every golf swing is really a chain reaction of movements, starting from the ground up, and that pelvis is the crucial link that connects it all.
Okay, I'm following. So let's break it down step by step. Let's see how this pelvis turn magic actually happens in the swing. The analysis here breaks it down into phases, starting with, the setup.
The address position.
Yep, exactly. And it says both men and women, they start with their pelvis slightly open, like pointing a couple of degrees away from the target.
Right, that slight open position.
Is that to give the rotation more room, more space for it to happen?
Exactly. It's that initial tension, like you're coiling a spring,
Yeah.
You got to have that to set up the potential for a powerful release.
Makes sense. Okay, so then you move into the backswing, and the pelvis starts rotating away from the target. And this is where things get interesting, right? Because there's some differences between how men and women do this.
Absolutely. There are some interesting nuances there.
Our analysis says that women actually rotate their pelvises further than men during this backswing, like 51 degrees close compared to 38 degrees for men.
Pretty significant difference, yeah.
So is that because women tend to be more flexible, you think?
Yeah, I mean, flexibility definitely plays a role. Women often do have greater hip flexibility, and that lets them get that extra rotation. But it's not just how far you rotate.
Okay, so there's more to it.
Oh, yeah. It's also about when you start that rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a key insight. The pelvis actually begins to rotate before the club reaches the top of the backswing.
Whoa, hold on. So it's like you're getting a head start on generating power.
Exactly. Like pulling back a slingshot,
Yeah.
The further you pull it back, the more energy you store and the more powerful that release is going to be. By starting that pelvic rotation early, you create this kind of stretch between your hips and your shoulders. Some people call it the X factor. And that stretch is what really winds up the spring for maximum power in the downswing.
Okay, I'm starting to see how it all works together. So then, as you transition into the downswing, the pelvis starts unwinding and rotating back toward the target. What's happening at impact?
All right, so at impact, your pelvis needs to be significantly open to allow for the proper sequencing of movements in your body. It's like a chain reaction, right? Each part has to move in the right order, starting from your feet all the way up to the club head. And if the timing's off, well, you lose power, you lose consistency.
And I'm guessing we see a difference between men and women here, too, at impact.
You bet. The analysis shows women's pelvises are much more open than men's at impact, about 52 degrees compared to 41 degrees.
Again, more of that flexibility advantage.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. Both men and women actually decelerate their pelvis rotation right before impact.
Wait, really? I would thought you'd want to be, like, rotating as fast as you can through impact.
It seems counterintuitive, I know.
Yeah.
But think of it like throwing a dart. If you just fling your arm as hard as possible, that dart's going to go all over the place,
That
right?
makes sense.
But if you slow down just before release, you have so much more control over where it goes. Same principle applies here.
So it's about control, not just speed.
Exactly. By decelerating the pelvis right before impact, you're slowing down the rotation just enough to make solid contact with the ball.
I never realized that was even happening.
Yeah, it's a subtle detail, but it makes a huge difference in your consistency.
Wow. Okay, so then you move through the follow-through, the pelvis keeps rotating, eventually reaching about 109 degrees open for men, and get this, a whopping 114 degrees for women.
Just flexibility strikes again.
So that's the breakdown from the analysis, but I want to bring in what the pros are saying. Let's hear from our second source, Henrik Jentsch, a PGA professional.
Love his work.
Oh, yeah. He makes a really good point. He emphasizes that the pelvis is like the bedrock of the swing.
Absolutely foundational.
Yeah, exactly. Get that right, and everything else falls into place. But he also cautions that too much rotation can actually lead to inconsistency, and not enough will limit your power. So it's all about finding that sweet spot, right?
Finding that balance that works for you.
And he makes another point that we saw in the data too, that the pelvis starts turning back toward the target before the club reaches the top of the backswing.
That early rotation, it's crucial for maximizing power.
Right. It's all about creating that X factor stretch that we talked about earlier.
Winding up that spring.
Exactly. And he even mentions a slight dip in pelvis speed right before impact, which lines up perfectly with what we saw in the analysis.
Isn't it cool how it all ties together, like two different perspectives, but they're telling the same story?
I know, it's so cool. So now I'm really curious to see how this actually plays out on the tour. We've got some data here from both PGA and LPGA players, and it's going to be fascinating to compare, right?
Oh, absolutely. Real-world data is always the most exciting part.
Okay, let's dive in. And looking at this data, just like in that analysis we talked about, women golfers on the LPGA tour, they're showing so much more pelvic rotation at every single point in their swing, especially in that follow-through. It's amazing to see those numbers.
And if you look at the speed of that rotation, things get even more interesting. LPGA players, they've got a higher max pelvis turn speed than the guys on the PGA Tour.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 510 degrees per second versus 484 for the men.
Wow, that's quite a difference. But wait, I'm looking at our data here, and it says that men have higher chest turn speeds. So does that mean they're making up for it by generating more power from their upper bodies?
It's possible, yeah. It seems like there's some fascinating differences in how men and women generate power in their swings. But here's another data point that'll really make you think LPGA players actually have a much higher hand speed at impact.
No way.
Yeah, 93 meters per second compared to 69 meters per second for the PGA guys.
Okay, so even though they're not rotating their chests as fast, they're still getting that club head moving like lightning. It's like they found a totally different way to generate that speed. So this is all super cool data, but let's make it practical for our listener who's probably out there thinking, okay, how do I use this to improve my game?
Right. Great point. You know, it's important to remember that it's not about trying to copy the pros exactly.
Yeah.
Everybody's body is different, and what works for a tour player might not work for you or me.
Right. We're not all built like Dustin Johnson.
Nope. The key is to understand the principles at play here. Things like that interplay between pelvis and chest rotation, and then figure out what works best for your own body.
So instead of getting hung up on the specific numbers, the degrees of rotation, it's more about experimenting and finding what feels right for you and gives you the most consistent, powerful swing.
Exactly. Forcing yourself into a position that your body doesn't like is a recipe for inconsistency and maybe even some injuries. But if you're not rotating enough, you're definitely leaving some power on the table. So it's all about finding that balance, where everything just clicks.
This is where I think technology can play a huge role, right? Like those golf swing analysis apps. I know you're a big fan of that Sportsbox AI 3D app.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was mentioned in one of our sources, and I love how it lets you see your swing in 3D and actually compare it to the pros.
It's super helpful.
Totally. Tools like that give you such amazing insight into your mechanics. They can help you pinpoint areas to focus on. It's like having a swing coach right in your pocket.
Absolutely. Speaking of swing coaches, I want to circle back to something our PGA pro, Henrik Jentsch, really emphasized. He said that the pelvis starts turning back toward the target before the club even reaches the top of the backswing.
Such a crucial point.
I know, and I'm still trying to fully wrap my head around it. Why is that early rotation so important? It just seems so counterintuitive.
I know, it does, right? But think about it this way. If you wait until your club reaches the top of the backswing to start rotating your pelvis, you're basically bringing everything to a screeching halt and then having to restart the whole motion.
Okay.
It's inefficient. You lose a lot of power that way. It's like slamming on the brakes and then trying to accelerate again. But if you start that pelvic rotation early, you're maintaining that momentum throughout the swing, which creates a much smoother, more powerful motion. You're basically building energy the whole time.
So you're not just using your arms, you're using your whole body to power the swing.
Precisely. And that early rotation also sets you up to create that separation between your hips and shoulders.
The X factor.
Exactly. Which, as we've discussed, is like winding up a spring to unleash all that stored energy at impact.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. It's not just about how much you rotate your pelvis, but also about when you start that rotation and how you continue it through the downswing. The timing of it all is crucial.
You got it. And the best part is, when you get the timing right, it doesn't just feel more powerful, it is more powerful. You're going to hit the ball farther, and you're going to do it more consistently.
This makes me want to head straight to the range. But first, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned. Pelvis turn, it's the foundation of a powerful, consistent golf swing. It's not just how far you rotate, but also when you start that rotation and how you control it through impact. And remember, everyone's different, so finding your optimal range of motion, finding your perfect timing, that's key. And don't forget about those helpful tools like Sportsbox AI 3D, which can give you some really great feedback on your swing.
Couldn't have summarized it better myself. Now, this has been an eye-opening deep dive, but it also kind of makes me wonder, if the pelvis is so crucial, are we overlooking other aspects of the swing? What other secrets are hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be discovered?
Such a good question. It reminds me that the pursuit of the perfect golf swing, it never really ends. There's always something new to learn, and that's part of what makes this game so fascinating.
It's like we're on a quest for the holy grail of golf swings.
Exactly. Always searching, always experimenting, always trying to improve.
All right, so we've definitely given our listener a lot to ponder today. But before we wrap up this whole exploration of the pelvis turn, I want to bring up one more thing that Henrik Jensch mentioned, something I was really struggling to grasp at first. He was talking about how the pelvis actually decelerates right before impact. It's like you're hitting the brakes right before you make contact with the ball. I'm
Yeah.
still trying to get my head around that. Shouldn't you be accelerating through impact? It does seem counterintuitive, but think of it this way. If your pelvis is rotating full speed through impact, you're going to have almost zero control over that club face. It's like trying to write your name neatly while you're spinning in a circle. It's almost impossible to be precise.
So slowing down just before impact, it's all about making sure you hit the ball in the sweet spot consistently.
Exactly. And that's one of the big things that separates the pros from the amateurs. They understand that slowing down at the right moment actually leads to more power and consistency in the long run.
Wow, this is seriously mind-blowing. It's these tiny little details that can make such a huge difference in your game.
And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore, and it's all interconnected.
Okay, so we've definitely given our listener a lot to think about. As we wrap up this deep dive into the pelvis turn, I want to leave you with this final thought. Don't be afraid to challenge those assumptions, keep experimenting, and never stop exploring. It really makes you think about what other areas of the swing could use this kind of deep dive treatment.
You know, you're right. There's always more to uncover.
I know, like we've been laser focused on the pelvis, but obviously it's not the only piece of the puzzle.
No, not at all. It's all connected, right?
Exactly. So where else should golfers be looking? What other parts of the swing are ripe for this kind of in-depth analysis?
Well, based on the data we saw, I think the relationship between the pelvis and the upper body is super interesting and definitely deserves more attention. Remember how we talked about LPGA players having those higher pelvis turn speeds but lower chest turn speeds compared to the guys on the PGA Tour?
Yeah, and yet they were still crushing it with those hand speeds.
Right, exactly. So it seems like there's a lot going on in terms of like the sequencing and the timing of how the upper and lower body work together.
It's not just about how fast each part is moving on its own, but how they're syncing up.
Right. Exactly. It's about finding that balance between creating separation, like that X factor stretch, and then efficiently transferring all that energy up through the body to the club head. Figuring out how to optimize that sequence for your specific body and your swing style, that could be huge.
That reminds me of something else. Henrik Jensch was talking about how the pelvis starts turning back toward the target before the club even reaches the top of the backswing. It's still kind of blowing my mind.
I know. It does seem counterintuitive at first.
It really does, but it makes more sense now when you think about maintaining momentum.
Right. It's like if you wait till the top of your swing to start that pelvic rotation, you're basically putting on the brakes.
And then you have to start from scratch to generate power for the downswing.
Exactly. So by starting that pelvic rotation early, you're keeping the energy flowing, creating a smoother, more powerful swing.
Yeah.
It's like you always moving forward, never really stopping.
I love that image.
And that early rotation also plays a big part in creating that separation we were talking about.
The X factor.
Right. That's what gives you the potential to really unleash all that stored power when you hit the ball.
I'm starting to see the big picture here. It's not just about individual movements. It's about the timing of those movements, how they flow seamlessly from one to the next. It really is like a dance.
It is. And like any good dance, it takes practice to really get those steps down.
We've definitely given our listeners a lot to practice. We've unpacked the power of the pelvis turn, explored how the lower and upper body work together, and really dug into the importance of timing and sequencing.
And we've emphasized that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to the golf swing.
Right. It's all about understanding the underlying principles, then experimenting, finding what feels right and what works best for you.
Absolutely.
And hey, don't be afraid to use technology. Those apps like Sportsbox AI 3D, they can be super valuable tools for analyzing your swing and getting personalized feedback.
Oh, for sure. But at the end of the day, it's all about using that data to inform your own intuition and develop your own feel for the swing.
It's like having a roadmap and a compass, but you still have to choose your own path.
Love that analogy.
So as we tee off from this incredible deep dive into the pelvis turn, I want to leave our listeners with this. The quest for the perfect golf swing, it's a journey and it never really ends. So embrace the challenge, keep experimenting, and never stop learning.
And most importantly, have fun out there.
Couldn't agree more. A huge thank you to our expert for joining me on this fascinating deep dive. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, happy swinging.
And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time for another exciting adventure into the world of knowledge.